The courthouse smelled like old paper and broken promises. I sat frozen as Mr. Brennan, the lawyer, read my father's will out loud. All assets, including the lakeside cabin and investment accounts, are hereby transferred to Marjorie Ward. His voice echoed in my ears like a bad dream. My hands went numb. The cabin was supposed to be mine. Dad had promised it to me every summer we spent there, fishing off the dock and watching sunsets. Marjorie sat across from me, spine straight as a ruler, wearing that smug smile I'd grown to hate. She leaned over and whispered, "I told you I'd take care of everything, sweetheart." The words felt like ice water down my back. On the lawyer's desk sat Dad's old pocket watch, the one he never took off. Seeing it there, away from him, made everything feel final and wrong. As I stumbled toward the exit, Mrs. Chun from next door touched my arm gently. "Did you know about the loans he took out last year?" she asked. "Loans? What loans?" My father never mentioned any loans. Something wasn't right here, and I was going to find out what. "My name is Elena Foster. I'm 26 years old, and I'm from a small town called Pinewood Falls in Oregon. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to my channel for more fascinating stories like this." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Marjorie's triumphant face and hearing Mrs. Chen's question about loans. At 3 in the morning, I started going through the boxes of Dad's papers I'd brought home from his house. There were birthday cards I'd sent him over the years, old receipts, a torn checkbook page with his messy handwriting. Then I found an envelope stamped estate trustee with a name I didn't recognize, someone called Ruth Patterson. My chest tightened. Why would Dad need a trustee? He'd always handled his own affairs. My phone rang, making me jump. It was my half-sister Vicky, someone I'd only just discovered existed 6 months ago. "Elena, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. Dad was acting strange before he died. He kept saying Marjorie was pressuring him about something. I grabbed a notebook and started making a list. I needed Ruth Patterson's contact information, copies of those mysterious loans, and anyone who'd witnessed Dad's state of mind in his final weeks. Finding Ruth Patterson took 3 days of phone calls and dead ends. When I finally knocked on her apartment door, a frail woman with kind eyes answered. The moment she saw me, tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, pulling me inside. I signed those papers, but I didn't understand what I was doing. Ruth had been one of my patients when I worked at Pinewood Falls Hospice 2 years ago. She explained how an aggressive lawyer kept showing up at her door, saying it was easier this way, and that she was just helping an old friend. But the real story came out slowly. Marjorie had visited her late one night, bringing expensive coffee and cookies, wearing her sweetest smile. "She made it sound like I was helping her father," Ruth said, her hands trembling. She said he wanted things simplified. Ruth handed me a photocopy of a document with Dad's signature that looked off somehow. The letters were shakier than usual, the spacing wrong. Marjorie's name appeared everywhere on the paperwork. Then Ruth's neighbor knocked on the door and mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I saw someone deliver a big envelope of papers to the lake cabin 2 weeks before your father passed," Ruth's neighbor said. Middle of the night, which seemed odd. I thanked them both and drove straight to First National Bank, where Dad had done his banking for 30 years. The main clerk wouldn't give me any information without legal paperwork, but as I was leaving, a tired-looking teller named Marcus called me back. He glanced around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "Your father's account showed a lot of activity before he died," Marcus said. "Small withdrawals every few days, then one large check made out to Marjorie Ward for $40,000. My stomach dropped. $40,000. Was Dad in his right mind when he authorized that? I asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. The signature looked shaky. And there was a co-signer on that check. He lowered his voice even more. The co-signer was listed as E. Foster, your initial. My heart stopped. I never co-signed anything. I hired a lawyer I could barely afford and filed a formal request for all Dad's banking records. When the documents finally arrived, I stared at the signature next to my name. It looked like mine, but wasn't. Someone had forged my signature. The forged signature kept me up at night. I hired a handwriting expert named Dr. Palmer who specialized in document fraud. While waiting for her analysis, I drove back to the lake cabin. Marjorie had changed the locks, but I still had the key to the storage shed. Inside, behind Dad's fishing gear, I found a hidden drawer in his old workbench. There was a faded Polaroid photograph tucked inside. It showed Dad and Marjorie standing at the lake's edge, but there was a third person, a younger woman I didn't recognize, standing between them. The back of the photo read Summer 1998 in Dad's handwriting. Behind the photo was a torn piece of notebook paper with a message that made my breath catch. If anything happens to me, trust Elena. Not Marjorie. Never Marjorie. My phone rang. It was Dr. Palmer. Miss Foster, I've compared the will signature with your father's letters and other documents, she said, her voice serious. The signatures are inconsistent. Someone practiced your father's handwriting and did a decent job, but under magnification, the pressure points and stroke patterns don't match. This will was tampered with. I needed more proof, more witnesses, more anything that could help me understand what Marjorie had done. The Pinewood Falls diner was the heart of town gossip, so I started eating lunch there every day. On my fourth visit, Mrs. Keller, who'd lived in Pinewood for 60 years, slid into my booth. I heard you're asking questions about your stepmother, she said, stirring her coffee. You should know Marjorie used to volunteer for the county's elder assistance program. She had access to files, addresses, financial information for dozens of seniors. My hands felt cold. Did she ever work with my father through that program? Mrs. Keller nodded slowly. About a year before he died. She told everyone she was being such a good stepdaughter, helping him with paperwork and doctor appointments. But that wasn't all. Mrs. Keller had seen Marjorie meeting with Mr. Brennan, the lawyer, at a coffee shop 2 weeks before Dad died. They were looking at documents and talking in whispers, she said. Seemed secretive. I filed a formal complaint with the County Elder Care Board. 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope of internal emails showing Marjorie's involvement with vulnerable seniors. One email made my heart race. It referenced a scheduled estate planning session for my father on the exact day he died, except nobody remembered him leaving the house that day. I requested Dad's medical records from Pinewood Memorial Hospital. The process took weeks of paperwork and phone calls, but eventually a thick file arrived. The nurse who'd signed Dad's chart on his last day was on extended leave, but a substitute nurse had left detailed notes. Patient confused and disoriented. Refused transportation to appointment. Family member present, but patient seemed uncomfortable. The ambulance log showed something even more disturbing. 2 calls from the lake cabin in the middle of the night, 3 days before Dad died. Both times, the ambulance was turned away at the door by family. I pulled the list of medical staff who'd been at the cabin. One name jumped out, a nurse's aide named Patricia Harding, personally recommended by Marjorie Ward. I tracked Patricia down at her new job in the next county. She agreed to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet park bench. Your stepmother paid me $500 to keep your father calm and discouraged from calling anyone, Patricia admitted, guilt written across her face. I didn't know she was planning something terrible. I thought I was just helping. Then she said something that changed everything. The ambulance report should show Marjorie's car was photographed at the cabin that night. I confronted Marjorie at a community fundraiser, where she was playing the grieving widow, accepting sympathy and donations. When I approached her near the refreshment table, her smile turned icy. Elena, darling, you're causing quite a scene with your wild accusations, she said loudly enough for others to hear. Your father loved me, and you're just being dramatic. But as she walked away, I followed at a distance. She stepped outside to take a phone call, and I crept close enough to hear. Keep those documents hidden under the 3rd floorboard like I told you, she hissed into her phone. Don't move them until this blows over. That night, I broke into the lake cabin, technically my inheritance, even if stolen. Under the 3rd floorboard in the master bedroom, I found a folder containing unpaid bills, bank statements showing transfers I'd never seen, and a notarized letter naming Marjorie as Dad's sole beneficiary. My hands shook as I read the date. The letter was dated 2 days after Dad's death. Impossible. unless someone had backdated it. The notary's seal looked fresh, but the notary's signature didn't match the name printed on the seal. I took photos of everything and checked the notary's registration. It belonged to Mr. Brennan, the same lawyer who'd read the will. Mr. Brennan's law office was downtown in a restored Victorian building. I couldn't just walk in and accuse him of fraud, so I started asking around. 3 former clients agreed to meet me, all elderly people who felt rushed through their estate planning. One woman named Dorothy gave me copies of phone records she'd kept showing frequent calls between Mr. Brennan and Marjorie in the weeks before Dad died. The pattern was clear. They'd been coordinating something. I filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association and waited. Legal systems move slowly, especially in small towns where everyone knows everyone. Then one morning, an envelope appeared on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with a handwritten note, Check Trust Clause 7B. I pulled out all the trust documents Ruth had given me and searched until I found Clause 7B buried in the legal language. It was a survivorship clause stating that if the original trustee was found to be incapacitated at the time of signing, the trust would revert to the next living heir, me. But I needed proof that Dad wasn't mentally capable when he signed. I realized I couldn't fight Marjorie alone. Over the next month, I built a team of allies, people who'd loved Dad and wanted the truth. There was Mr. Kowalski, the handyman who still had keys to Dad's shed. He showed me a ledger he'd found hidden behind the water heater, listing cash withdrawals that didn't match any household expenses. Mrs. Chun, the neighbor, agreed to testify that Dad couldn't have driven himself anywhere in his final weeks because his hands shook too badly. The biggest surprise came from inside Mr. Brennan's own office. A young paralegal named Tricia called me one night, her voice trembling. I saw things that didn't sit right with me, she said. I made copies of the appointment logs before I quit. She met me at a coffee shop 3 towns over and handed me a flash drive. The appointments showed Marjorie visiting Mr. Brennan's office 6 times in the month before Dad died, always outside normal business hours. Together, we created a timeline proving Dad's declining mental state and Marjorie's increasing access. Then Tricia said something that made my heart pound. There's one more thing, a voicemail Mr. Brennan deleted. I saved a copy before it was wiped from the system. We sat in my car in the dark parking lot while Tricia played the voicemail through her phone. Dad's voice came through, weak and confused. Why is Marjorie taking everything? I told her the cabin goes to Elena. Why won't anyone listen to me? Then a man's voice, smooth and professional. Mr. Brennan. It'll be easier if we handle this quietly, sir. Just sign here, and everything will be taken care of. The recording ended with the sound of paper shuffling. I had tears running down my face. This was proof of coercion, proof that Dad hadn't wanted any of this. I took the recording to the Bar Association investigators, who immediately opened a formal inquiry into Mr. Brennan's conduct. Within days, he was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Marjorie must have found out because she suddenly went into overdrive on social media, posting photos from charity events and volunteering activities, trying to maintain her image as a loving widow. Then one of her society friends posted a photo from a luncheon, and I nearly dropped my phone. In the picture, Marjorie was wearing Dad's pocket watch on a chain around her neck like a trophy. That watch was the final straw. Dad had worn it every single day since I was born. It had his initials engraved on the back along with my birth date. Seeing it on Marjorie's neck made me physically sick. I took a screenshot of the photo and emailed it to the investigators with a detailed explanation of the watch's significance. When I confronted Marjorie at the grocery store, she barely glanced at me. Your father gave me many gifts, she said coldly. You need to move on, Elena. This bitterness isn't healthy. But Mrs. Chun had more information. She'd seen Marjorie loading boxes into her car 2 days after the will reading. Antiques from your father's house, she said. I thought it was strange how quickly she was clearing things out. I contacted the local auction houses and found that Marjorie had sold a set of Dad's antique tools and fishing equipment through a dealer. The dealer's records showed the buyer was a company called Heritage Holdings LLC. I traced the company registration and found Marjorie's signature as the registered agent. She'd created a shell company to hide the sale of Dad's belongings. My lawyer, a determined woman named Ms. Torres, warned me to be careful. That same day, she received an anonymous note slipped under her office door. Careful. Some people don't appreciate nosy questions. The threat only made me more determined. Ms. Torres and I began organizing depositions from everyone who'd witnessed Dad's decline and Marjorie's manipulation. Mr. Kowalski testified about the odd requests Marjorie made to change locks and install security cameras. Mrs. Chin described Dad's anxiety whenever Marjorie was around. Even Patricia, the nurse's aide, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Each piece of testimony painted Marjorie as a calculating manipulator who'd isolated Dad from friends and family. Marjorie fought back by spreading rumors around town. She told people I was unstable, that I'd always been jealous of her relationship with Dad, that I was only after money. My half-sister Vicky called me in tears because Marjorie had convinced her I was lying. I don't know who to believe anymore, Vicky said. But the evidence kept mounting. The Bar Association subpoenaed Mr. Brennan's records, and he started cooperating to save his own career. Then something unexpected happened. The local newspaper ran a small notice about a bankruptcy filing. The business in question was Marjorie's art gallery, which she'd been running for 3 years. Apparently, several investors were suing her for fraud. Marjorie's art gallery had always seemed successful, but the bankruptcy filing revealed it was all smoke and mirrors. The gallery operated as an art flipping scheme where she'd buy cheap pieces, create fake provenance documents, and sell them at inflated prices. Her investors included several people whose elderly relatives had worked with her through the county elder care program. Now those families were coming forward with their own stories of financial manipulation. The court froze Marjorie's bank accounts, pending investigation. She tried to spin the narrative, claiming she was a victim of economic hardship and vindictive former partners, but a gallery employee turned whistleblower handed me transaction logs. They showed Marjorie had diverted investor funds directly into her personal accounts. Around this same time, Mrs. Chin brought me a shoebox she'd found while cleaning out her garage. Inside were journals Dad had asked her to store for safekeeping months before he died. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. In shaky handwriting, Dad had written, July 15th, I fear Marjorie's plans. She keeps pushing me to sign papers I don't understand. Need to protect Elena's inheritance. The entries got more desperate as the dates progressed. The final entry, dated a week before Dad died, mentioned something that made my heart race. Sealed envelope under the hearth. My insurance policy. Elena must find it. I drove to the lake cabin at dawn, broke in again through the back window, and searched the fireplace hearth. Under the third stone from the left, I found a small waterproof envelope sealed with wax. My hands shook as I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a notarized letter dated 5 years earlier, long before Marjorie had even entered our lives. The letter was witnessed by Ruth Patterson and Mr. Kowalski, and it stated clearly that if Dad died under suspicious circumstances, or if his will was altered without proper witnesses, I would be granted provisional stewardship of his estate pending a full investigation. This letter contradicted everything Marjorie and Mr. Brennan had presented. I immediately took it to Ms. Torres, who filed an emergency motion with the probate court. Within 48 hours, we had a court order freezing the entire estate and launching a formal investigation. Marjorie's response was immediate and vicious. She hired a public relations firm and started appearing on local news shows, crying about being falsely accused by a vindictive stepdaughter. She even filed her own emergency motion claiming Dad had been of sound mind when he signed the updated will. Her new lawyer presented a surprise witness who supposedly could prove everything was legitimate. The witness was a woman named Barbara Yates, who claimed to be a close friend of Dad's. She testified that she'd been present at a dinner party where Dad explicitly stated he wanted Marjorie to inherit everything because I'd abandoned him. I'd never heard of Barbara Yates in my life. But Tricia, the paralegal, worked her magic again. She searched social media and found photos from the supposed dinner party. The metadata on the photo showed they were taken months after Dad's death and had been digitally altered to include Barbara in shots where she hadn't originally appeared. We presented this evidence at the next hearing, along with testimony from real friends of Dad's who'd never met Barbara. The judge was not pleased. He ordered a full evidentiary hearing to review all documents, testimonies, and physical evidence. Marjorie's confident smile started to crack. Her lawyer looked increasingly nervous as the evidence mounted against them. Then, just as momentum seemed completely in our favor, something unexpected happened. Mr. Brennan, facing disbarment and possible criminal charges, filed for bankruptcy and disappeared. His office was locked, his phone disconnected, and nobody knew where he'd gone. But his email server backup told a different story. Tricia managed to access Mr. Brennan's archived emails through a legal loophole. What we found was devastating for Marjorie's case. There were dozens of emails between Brennan and Marjorie, including one where he explicitly wrote, "If needed, we can adjust dates on the documents. The notary is flexible." Another email referenced a private investigator Marjorie had hired to follow me, documenting my work schedule and habits. The emails proved conspiracy to commit fraud. We delivered everything to the court, and the judge ordered an immediate investigation by the district attorney's office. Around town, people who'd once smiled at Marjorie and accepted her charity donations now crossed the street to avoid her. Her social media accounts went dark. She stopped appearing at public events. But Marjorie had one final desperate move. She filed a motion for emergency guardianship over Dad's medical records, claiming she needed to protect his privacy and dignity. It was a transparent attempt to block testimony about his mental decline. Ms. Torres immediately filed a countermotion, arguing that I should be granted guardianship to ensure transparency in the investigation. The hearing room was packed with spectators from town. The guardianship hearing lasted 3 days. Witness after witness testified about Dad's declining mental state in his final months. Dr. Kim, his primary physician, explained that Dad had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 6 months before his death, something Marjorie had never disclosed. Mrs. Chin testified about the times she'd found Dad confused in his own yard. Mr. Kowalski described how Dad had forgotten where he kept his fishing gear, items he'd used for 30 years. The judge appointed a neutral guardian ad litem to review all medical records and interview witnesses. 2 weeks later, the Guardian's report concluded that Dad likely lacked the mental capacity to make major financial decisions in his final 3 months of life. The report recommended invalidating any documents signed during that period. Marjorie looked pale and shaken leaving the courthouse. Her few remaining supporters melted away. That evening, I found a note taped to my apartment door. It was from Marjorie, written in her precise handwriting. "You think you've won, but you'll see I planned for everything. This isn't over." The cryptic message kept me awake all night. What else could she possibly have planned? The answer came from an unexpected source. A woman named Janet Morris called me, saying she'd lent Marjorie a flash drive containing estate documents for safekeeping 2 years ago and never got it back. Marjorie bragged about having insurance policies and backup plans, Janet said nervously. "I think she copied files onto USB drives and hid them." This information was enough for Ms. Torres to request a search warrant for the lake cabin. The police executed the warrant on a cold November morning. In the attic, inside a weathered tin box, they found 3 CDs labeled trust documents, bank records, and audio files. One CD contained a full audio recording of a meeting at Mr. Brennan's office where Marjorie could be heard pressuring Dad to sign documents. Dad's voice was weak, but clear. "I don't understand why this is necessary. Elena should have the cabin. I promised her." Marjorie's voice responded, smooth and insistent. "This is better for everyone, darling. Trust me." The recording ended with Dad saying, "If something happens to me, Elena must have everything. She must know the truth." Then a third voice, presumably Mr. Brennan, said quietly, "Then she'll never find out." With the recording, Dr. Palmer's handwriting analysis, the forged signatures, the backdated documents, and testimony from multiple witnesses, we finally had everything we needed. The district attorney scheduled a public hearing to present evidence for potential criminal charges. The courtroom was standing room only. Local news cameras lined the back wall. I sat next to Miss Torres, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, while the prosecutor played the audio recording. You could have heard a pin drop. Marjorie sat at the defense table, her face emotionless, but her hands trembled. When the recording ended with that chilling line about me never finding out, several people in the gallery gasped. The judge called for a brief recess, then announced that based on the overwhelming evidence of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy, he was referring the case to the criminal prosecutor. Marjorie's lawyer requested a continuance, citing a legal technicality about the recording's admissibility. But the prosecutor was prepared with documentation proving the recording was made legally on Dad's own device. Still, Marjorie had one card left to play. 3 days after the hearing, she collapsed at home and was rushed to the hospital. The news of Marjorie's collapse spread through Pinewood Falls like wildfire. People had mixed reactions. Some thought it was karma, others felt sympathy, and a few suggested she was faking it to gain public pity. My own feelings were complicated. I'd spent months fighting her, gathering evidence, pushing for justice, but seeing her in a hospital bed connected to monitors made me question everything. Miss Torres reminded me that compassion and accountability weren't mutually exclusive. You can ensure she gets proper medical care while still pursuing justice, she said firmly. Against my lawyer's advice, I visited Marjorie in the hospital. She looked small and frail in the bed, nothing like the confident woman who'd stolen my inheritance. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. I never meant for things to go this far, she whispered. I just wanted security. Your father had so much, and I had nothing. I wanted to believe her, but I remembered the forged signatures, the manipulated documents, the systematic isolation of my father. You had choices, I said quietly. You chose to hurt him. You chose to lie. She asked me to drop the charges, to show mercy. I refused. Justice for Dad mattered more than her tears. While Marjorie recovered, a new complication emerged. A distant cousin of hers, someone named Marjorie Ward, filed a lawsuit claiming Marjorie was owed a portion of the estate based on a verbal promise Dad allegedly made. The claim looked suspicious from the start. The handwriting on the supporting documents seemed inconsistent, and several dates didn't align with Dad's actual timeline. The court ordered mediation. Marjorie's legal team pushed hard for a settlement, probably hoping to get some money before criminal charges were finalized. Ms. Torres and I discussed strategy late into the night. A settlement would be cheaper and faster, she admitted, but it would also let her off easy. I thought about Dad's journal entries, his confusion, his pleas for someone to listen. A settlement felt like betraying him all over again. We pushed for trial, I decided. Dad deserves full justice, not a compromise. The prosecutor, hearing about our resolve, doubled down on the criminal investigation. Then, a week before the trial was set to begin, Marjorie's former business partner from the art gallery came forward with new evidence. He brought a detailed ledger showing years of embezzlement and fraud, not just against Dad, but against dozens of clients and investors. The ledger was a revelation. It showed systematic theft dating back 5 years, long before Marjorie married Dad. She'd been running scams through her gallery, convincing elderly clients to invest in art pieces that didn't exist or were worthless forgeries. One entry particularly caught my attention, a transfer to an offshore trust account in Belize that I'd never heard of. Ms. Torres immediately brought in forensic accountants to trace the money trail. What they found was staggering. The offshore trust was connected through shell companies back to Marjorie's personal accounts. Dad's stolen inheritance was just one part of a much larger pattern of financial abuse. The prosecutor used this information to build a case not just for elder abuse and fraud, but for organized financial crimes. During the trial, Marjorie's carefully constructed image completely fell apart. Under cross-examination, she contradicted her earlier sworn statements multiple times. Her lawyer tried to object, to redirect, but the damage was done. The jury could see through her lies. On the final day of testimony, something unexpected happened. My half-sister Vicky, who'd been torn between believing me and believing Marjorie, walked into the courtroom and asked to testify. Vicky sat in the witness stand looking nervous, but determined. She testified about the pressure Marjorie had put on her to side against me, the stories Marjorie had told about Dad wanting her to have everything, the times Vicky had caught Marjorie in small lies that seemed harmless at the time. I was scared, Vicky admitted, tears running down her face. Scared of losing the only mother figure I had left. But Elena was right all along. Her testimony was devastating because it came from someone who'd initially defended Marjorie. After court adjourned, Vicky found me in the hallway. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner," she said, her voice breaking. We hugged for a long time while cameras flashed around us. The next morning, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts: elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Marjorie's face went blank as the judge read the verdict. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, including me. But there was one final complication. The trustee called me that afternoon with urgent news. Due to a legal technicality involving creditor claims, I could lose the lake cabin unless I acted immediately. I rushed to file the proper paperwork, invoking Dad's original sealed letter and Clause 7B from the trust documents. Ms. Torres worked through the night to prepare a motion. The next day, the court officially recognized the survivorship clause and, combined with the criminal convictions, restored the entire estate to me. I stood outside the courthouse in the morning sun, feeling like I could finally breathe. 2 weeks later, I drove to the lake cabin, my cabin now. Marjorie was transferred to a minimum security facility where she'd serve her sentence. Ironically, the facility followed strict elder care protocols, many of which I'd helped implement when I worked in hospice. She would receive proper medical care and supervision, the same things she'd denied Dad. I walked through the cabin, touching Dad's fishing rods, his books, his chair by the window. On the mantel, I placed his pocket watch, returned to me by the court. The inscription on the back caught the light, his initials and my birth date, proof of his love. That evening, Mrs. Chin stopped by with her grandson, who handed me a crayon drawing of the lake house. "My grandma says your daddy would be proud," the boy said. I looked at the water reflecting the sunset and felt Dad's presence. I'd kept my promise to him. As I locked up for the night, I placed a small sealed envelope in the hidden drawer under the hearth, addressed to Vicky's future children. Inside was a note: "Always do what's right, even when it's hard. Truth matters more than comfort." Justice wasn't just about winning, it was about choosing to be better than those who'd tried to break us.